They say, some moments arrive like lightning, sudden, silent, and splitting your world in two. That morning was supposed to be routine. At meetings, back-to-back deals, to finalize headlines, to dodge, but something pulled me away from the city. Something I could not explain, so I turned off the main road and drove past neighborhoods that looked like memories. Asterisk. Old brick buildings, cracked sidewalks, faded blue sign that read West Elm Elementary, that school, that hallway, that cold air laced with echoes. From a life I thought I had left behind, I parked across the street and stared at the gate. Children ran in and out like flocks of birds, all noise and motion, but there was something wrong in the rhythm, something I could feel but not see. And then I heard it. Asterisk, a soft trembling sound that slid through the winter wind. I stepped closer, and there it was. A gay child crying alone. She sat on the edge of the steps, her knees hugged to her chest, a backpack beside her like it carried more weight than Butcher. Hair was tied with a red ribbon, but her face was pale with sadness. I stood there for a moment, frozen, not because I did not care, because I knew that cry, knew the hollow pain in her voice. It was the same sound I used to make when no one came to pick me up. My shoes crunched on the gravel as I approached. Slowly. Asterisk, hey you. Okay. She looked up, her eyes glassy, her lips trembling. Everyone got something from Santa, but not me. That sentence shattered something in me, because once upon a time, I said the exact same thing to a stranger who never answered. What did you ask for? I asked. Gently, a hug, just one. Asterisk. Have you ever seen a child lose faith in magic? It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is a quiet, slow breaking. I sat down beside her, not saying a word, just letting the silence speak between us. She told me her name was Lily, 7 years old. Her mom worked 2 jobs and still could not afford much this year. Her dad was gone, and Christmas just felt like another day without Colary. Reached into my coat and pulled out my phone, but not to call anyone. Opened the last photo I took before leaving my childhood home. A living room with peeling wallpaper and a single broken chair. No tree, no gifts, just silence. I showed her the photo and said, this was my Christmas when I was your age. She stared, then looked at me again. But you are rich now? Yes, I whispered, but I was not always. Something shifted in her eyes. Not joy, but understanding. Then she asked something that caught me off guard. Why did you come here today? I paused. Because I do not know, but I think it was to meet you. I stood up and offered her my hand. Come on. She hesitated. Where are we going to find your hug? Her fingers curled around mine, and for the first time, she smiled just a little, but it was enough. We walked back toward my car, and I looked over my shoulder at the school. It felt like something had been waiting there for years, like my past had been holding its breath for this very moment. But the story was not over. In fact, he was just beginning. Her small voice echoed in my mind even after I left the hallway. I could not shake the way she had said I'd asked Santa for a hug, but he didn't come. That was not just sadness. That was something deeper, loneliness maybe, or something even darker. As I sat in my car outside the school, I looked at my hands resting on the steering wheel. 25 years old, and I had everything that could be bought, but in that moment, I felt like I had nothing that truly mattered. What was her name? I kept asking myself that over and over. I had never felt this kind of urgency before. I knew I could not leave things the way they were. I walked back into the school. I did not know what I was going to say or do, but my heart told me I had to be there. The halls were mostly empty. Now only a few teachers and staff were left. I found the janitor sweeping near the back stairwell, and I asked him if he knew the girl I had seen. He gave me a long look, then nodded slowly. Yeah, that would be Emily, he said. Quiet kid. Real quiet shit. Lost her mom last winter, and her dad's not around much. Why you asking? I paused, trying to explain what I could not really put into words. I overheard her talking to herself. I think she thinks Santa forgot her. The janitor stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. It was a tough time for a kid to be alone. She sits by the window every day, even during lunch, just watching outside like she's waiting for something that never comes. My throat tightened. I thanked him and walked outside again, but I did not go home. Instead, I drove around the city with no clear direction, just thinking. I passed the expensive stores I used to love, the places I used to show off, and none of them felt like they meant anything anymore. Why does a billionaire care about one little girl? I asked myself again and again, but I knew the answer asterisk because for the first time, I heard something real, not business, not profit, not fame, just a cry from a small voice that broke through all the noise that night. I did not sleep. Opened my laptop and searched for everything I could about the school, the neighborhood, the children who lived there asterisk. I found stories, some sad, some heartbreaking. I found records of Emily and her mother, a social worker, report about the accident that took her mommy. Heart ached, reading the lines written in cold, detached language, no living relatives listed except father location. Unknown. How do we let this happen? I whispered to myself. How does a child end up invisible in a world full of people? Next morning I was outside the school again this time. I waited near the gate with a wrapped box in my hands and a nervous heart inside. My chest. Emily walked up alone again, her backpack almost as big as she was. Asterisk. I took a breath and stepped forward. Hi, Emily, I said softly, remembering not to scare her. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide with surprise. Heard you like Christmas? I continued. And I was wondering if maybe I could give you something. She hesitated, then nodded very slowly. She took the box from my hands and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a hand-stitched red scarf with her name, embroidered in gold thread asterisk. It was simple, but warm and soft. She looked at it like it was the first real gift she had ever held. Thank you, she whispered, hugging it tightly. I knelt beside her and smiled. Santa may have been busy this year, but he sent someone else instead. Her lips curled into a small smile, the first I had seen asterisk. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me a folded potpourri. Opened it and found a drawing of a stick figure man holding hands with a little girl. Next to a Christmas tree below it, she had written, "Thank you for seeing." May felt something shift inside me that night. I called my board of directors and told them I was taking a leave of absence asterisk. They were confused, angry even, but I did not care. Had something more important to build, now a home for the unseen place, where no child would ever feel forgotten again. Weeks passed and I started buying property near the school, not to develop for business, but to create something sacred, a community center with counselors, teachers, hot meals, and safe spaces. I called it the warm room. But as construction began, something strange happened that night. I would receive letters left on my doorstep unsigned, but written in a childlike scrawl. The first one said, "Thank you for not looking away." The second one had a drawing of a clock with no hands and a note that read, "Time stands still when you're alone." They kept coming, and I started to wonder who was leaving them. Was it Emily or someone else? One night, I stayed back in the neighborhood and watched from my car near midnight. I saw a shadow dart across the street and leave another note near my building gate. I got out and followed quietly. The figure ran toward the old factory that had been abandoned for years. I hesitated, but something told me I needed to see where this path led inside the factory. Everything was dark and dusty. I crept through the hallways until I saw a faint light. Ahead, it was Emily, sitting by a makeshift bed with a flashlight and a notebook. "Emily," I called softly, and she jumped in fear. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She looked down, ashamed. "Sorry, I just didn't want to go home." I walked over and sat beside her. "Why this place?" I asked gently asterisk. She pointed to a photo on the wall of her mother and her in front of the factory years ago. Used to bring me here and say we could dream big in big places. My chest tightened again. That night I took her home with me, not to my mansion, but to the shelter I had started building. It was unfinished, but it had warmth and safety as she slept on the new bed. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling. How many more children were out there hiding in silence, and why had it taken me this long to hear even one? The next morning, the mayor called me asterisk. He had heard rumors about my work and wanted to meet. I agreed, but something felt off. As I arrived at City Hall, the mayor greeted me with a forced smile. He asked questions not about Emily or the children, but about my motives, investments, and whether I intended to make the shelter profitably. Told him no, this was not business. This was personal. He nodded. But there was tension in the room. After I left, I started receiving letters not from children, but from lawyers. Zoning issues, tax flags, inspection, demands. Someone was trying to stop me. But why asterisk? I began digging deeper, and what I found chilled me. The Abandoned factory was part of a larger block owned by a shell company that had been quietly buying properties around the school. Their goal was to demolish the area and build luxury condos. My project was a threat to their plan. Emily was living proof that this place had value far beyond money, but they were powerful and I was. One man, could I fight this asterisk, or would I lose everything before the miracle even began then? Question echoed in my mind as I walked through the half-built shelter, wondering what came next. The snow outside kept falling like time itself, folding softly on the window ledge while I stood there watching the horizon fade into white. Behind me, the school hallway was nearly empty, echoing with the distant sound of a janitor pushing his cart. And somewhere, a heater rattled like an old heartbeat, trying to keep the building alive, but my own heart was heavy and wide open, because what I had just seen, what I had just heard from her, it would not leave me alone. Asterisk, her voice still echoed in my mind. She said she did not get even a single hug this Christmas, not even from Santa, and I had just stood there, a billionaire surrounded by everything, and yet I had no answer, no immediate way to fix the cracks that ran so deep in her words. Asterisk. I turned around and walked back toward the small bench outside the classroom where she used to sit during recess. Her red scarf was still hanging on the hook by the door, almost forgotten like her. I picked it up, feeling the threads between my fingers. Soft but torn near one edge, as if it had snagged on something sharp. It reminded me of how easily people fray when no one is watching. Asterisk. Why do some children carry loneliness like a second backpack, heavier than their books, heavier than anything they will ever be tested? Oni took out my phone and dialed someone I had not called in a long time. It's not for business, not for interviews, but for something human. My old middle school principal, Mr. Kerrigan. When he picked up, I could hear the years in his voice, but also a strange clarity, like he had been waiting for this call without knowing Edie. Asked him about her, about where she came from, about what kind of life she might be going back to after the holidays. He told me what little he knew: a foster home that had recently changed locations, a guardian who was rarely seen at school events, and a history of shifting files and unanswered emails. Asterisk. I asked him to help me find a way to reach out, not with a charity banner or news cameras, but in a way that would not feel like a rescue, more like a reunion with something lost. Asterisk. That night I could not sleep. I sat by the fireplace at my apartment and just stared at the small wooden box that my mother once gave me. Inside were 3 small cards each, with a phrase she used to whisper when I felt broken: "You are seen, you are loved, you are not forgotten." Wondered if that girl had ever heard such words. I wondered how many children go to sleep never knowing they matter. The next morning I walked back to the school, not as a billionaire, not as a boardroom strategist, but as someone who once sat alone at lunch and waited for a kindness that never came. Asterisk. She was standing by the school gate, her backpack larger than her shoulders and her head slightly bowed, as if trying to disappear between the bricks and cold air. Walked toward her slowly and stopped at a distance that felt safe. I said, "Hey, I think you dropped this scarf yesterday." She looked up and her eyes were cautious, like someone trying to measure whether hope was worth the risk. Asterisk. She nodded and took the scarf, her fingers brushing mine for a second, just a second, then she whispered, "Thank you." But it was the way she said it, like it had been kept inside for too long. We stood there for a moment, not saying anything. Then I asked, "Do you like stories?" Her eyes widened just a little and she nodded again. Asterisk. So I told her one right there by the gate, while the wind played with the hem of my coat and the world moved slower than usual. It was a story my grandfather used to tell me about a little girl who once asked the stars why they never came closer, and the stars whispered back, "Because sometimes light has to stay far away to show you the way through darkness." Asterisk. When I finished, she was smiling just a bit. Not the wide kind of smile you see in movies, but something real, like the first bloom after winter. Why do we wait until people break before we notice their silence? That afternoon, I went back to my office and canceled 3 meetings. I called my legal advisor and asked what it would take to set up a private program. It's not a nonprofit, not a label, just something that would quietly fund special Christmas experiences for children. Transition, foster youth, single-parent homes, kids who had seen more silence than songs. He asked why the change, and I said because someone cried at school and the world did not hear her. But I did. Asterisk. Over the next week we worked late nights writing policies, drafting anonymous delivery systems using school networks, as quiet bridges between kids and kindness. No names, no flashy cards, just gifts wrapped in gentleness, asterisk a few. Teachers volunteered to help. One counselor cried on the call and said, "She wished someone had done this years ago." Why? Does it take a billionaire to notice the tears that schools wipe away before parents arrive? I went back to that school again before Christmas break. This time, I was invited to read a book to the third grade class. She was there sitting in the middle row, holding her scarf like a thread between yesterday and today. When I walked in with the storybook in hand, she looked up, and this time her eyes were not cautious. They were curious. And that tiny shift, that invisible change, it felt bigger than anything I had ever built after class. I gave each child a small envelope with a note inside. Nothing about me, nothing about who I was, just a message written in simple in-cue. "Arsene, you are loved. You are not forgotten," she opened hers slowly and read it like it was a secret too soft for the world to hear. That night I received a drawing. Folded into 4 parts and left by the school gate, it was of a boy giving a star to a girl under a snowy sky, and in the corner were 4 words that broke me open. "You brought the light back." No one had signed it, but I did not need a signature. Do we pretend that money is the only way to measure impact? There are some days that redefine your entire existence. Not because they are loud, but because they whisper something sacred into your bones. I knew I was no longer just a billionaire. I was something else, someone who had been changed by the quiet miracle of listening. And Christmas was never the same again. The cold morning air whispered through the empty school courtyard as I stood silently near the gate, watching the sunlight pour through the frost-kissed windows of the old brick building. I had not slept much the night before. Maybe it was the weight of what had begun. Maybe it was the fear that I was stepping into something far bigger than myself. Or maybe it was the sound of her voice that still echoed in my heart, a voice too soft, too broken. I walked slowly through the hallway, each step bringing back memories of the last few days. The sound of kids laughing, the echo of shoes on the tiles, and that one moment that changed everything. Yes, lighting up when she saw me. "You came," she said with a trembling smile. "I thought you forgot." "Could never forget," I said softly, and sat beside her. Her eyes had hope in them now. Something I had not seen before. Asterisk. We spent an hour reading together, her voice gradually gaining confidence, until she was reading entire pages with pride and joy. "Are you helping me?" she asked, suddenly her eyes wide and curious. Asterisk. I looked at her, not knowing what to say, and then I told her the truth, because someone once helped me when I was lost, and now it is my turn. She nodded and smiled again, but then her face turned serious. "My mom still cries at night," she whispered. "She misses Dad, and Christmas is always hard." Asterisk. That night I sat in my apartment staring at the city lights, wondering how to do more, how to bring light to a home that had been living in shadow. I remembered what my father once told me before he passed away. Real wealth is not what you keep, but what you give. The next morning I made a call to my team. "I want everything ready by Christmas Eve." I told them quietly, no noise, no attention, just impact. They did not question me. They knew something had changed in me. December 24th, I walked with her through the hallway again. This time I told her I had a surprise. Asterisk. We drove silently until we reached a small house with a red door. She looked at it, confused. "Go ahead," I said. She stepped out slowly. Her mother was standing on the porch, tears in her eyes. Asterisk. The roof was fixed, the windows were new, and inside the warmth of a new heating system filled the space with comfort. I looked at her mother and said, "This is not charity, this is a gift from someone who believes your daughter deserves a childhood with hope." She hugged me tightly and whispered blessings I cannot forget. Asterisk. As we left, she looked back at the house one more time, her eyes shining with disbelief. "Do you believe in miracles now?" I asked. She nodded. "I do now." Asterisk. But the story does not end. Their news of what happened began to spread, not because I shared it, but because someone else did. Asterisk. Messages started arriving from people who wanted to help, who had seen what a simple act of kindness could ignite. So, we built something more. Asterisk. A small fund, a quiet foundation, not for profit, not for praise, but for the invisible children like her scattered across the city. Each week we chose one more family, one more story to rewrite. Asterisk, she became the heart of that movement. Her smile, the symbol of hope that real change could come. Quietly and with dignity, but then something unexpected happened. I received a letter from a boy across the ocean who had seen the story online. Asterisk, he wrote about his sister and how they had lost their parents to war and how Christmas was just another day of hunger for them. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were clear. Please tell the girl I saw her smile, and it gave me hope. Asterisk. That is when I knew this was bigger than me, bigger than one girl or one city. It was about all of us, about what we choose to do when we hear someone cry in the dark. Do we walk away, or do we stop and listen? On the first day of the new year, I returned to the school. She was there waiting with a card in her hand. Thank you, it said. But more than that, thank you for hearing me. Asterisk. And then she said something I will never forget. Didn't he just change my Christmas? You changed my life. Asterisk. I walked away that day knowing the world had shifted, not in noise or headlines, but in the quiet moments where hearts choose kindness over comfort. Asterisk. And now, as I sit here sharing this with you, I ask you the same question I asked myself back then. When you hear someone crying, will you keep walking, or you become the miracle they never expected?